I've rung the bell. I don't think it's a ship's bell, but I've rung the bell. So we're on our way. Welcome to everybody, obviously, in the room, and welcome to everybody on screen. I think we're particularly happy to see Norman Wimborne back. He's had a bit of a rough time, but pleased to see him and others. And I haven't got around to the people in the room yet. And of course, Harry's here, which you haven't seen for a while. Do we have any visitors from other Rotary clubs? Would you like to tell us who you are, please?
I'm the assistant governor.
Ah, come down here, yeah. Don't worry. I thought you looked very important. Yes, so they can see you on the, there you go.
Hi, I'm Assistant Governor Deepa Goenka. I'm also the past president, and I represent District 314 from Mumbai, India.
Good to see you.
Hi, I'm Katie Whittlesey from Atlanta, Georgia. Just moved to London, so am visiting clubs in order to transfer my membership.
Very good.
Very good.
Welcome visitors. Notices. Anybody got any notices?
Yeah, Ian.
Oh, sorry. Anybody on screen?
Yeah, we've got visiting Rotary. We've got Paul Ziles from the Rotary Club of
Do apologise.
Thank you. Thank you.
Stationers, I can see that. Yeah.
Yes, that's fine.
And we've had Inga from Norway. He's visited us on a number of occasions. We're pleased to see him again today.
Thank you.
We have someone who's Olaf Koenig, who's possibly a prospective member who's joined us today by Zoom. And
Good.
we have Anastasia, and a little bit more about Anastasia later. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if they want to say anything. Paul, always pleased to see you, and Inga, always pleased to see you. There we are. Okay, any notices? Anybody, any committee chairman got any notices?
Yeah, if you want to talk about the rest of it. Yeah. If you want to
Yeah.
All the 30 feet. What number of 30 feet at the moment? We need to get up to at least 50.
Okay, no, I don't know if, first of all, introduce myself to the those who don't know me, including the new members or visiting members. I'm Doug Wills, member of this club and chairman of the International Committee. And in a couple of weeks' time, Saturday, November the 6th, we have our international dinner, the East India Club, and the latest number that's just come from you is that we have some 33, was it? 33 acceptances of people who are attending. We really need to hit 50. It can be more than 50, but we do need to hit 50. So I know some people just haven't got round to it. So if you can reply to Hugh with a yes and how many, that would be great. We're also looking for prizes, auction prizes or raffle prizes, and also some help on the evening. So if you have any of those, help, physical prizes or anything, if you can send myself an email, Hugh, maybe send to one of us, CC the other, and then we'll hopefully have a great evening. So it's only a couple of weeks away. So if we get on the case, that would be very, very helpful. Thank you.
Did you want to ask a question? I think Norman wanted to ask a question.
No.
You need to unmute yourself if you want to ask a question, Norman.
We could move on because we're yeah. Norman, I'm sure we can find Norman. We can tell Norman where to send the money to, so that's not a problem. Do we have any visits to other clubs other than Redbridge? I know quite a few members went to the conference at Eastbourne over the weekend. Had a good time, and no doubt we'll have a full report on that in due course. Almina, how are you? Very pleased to see you back.
Thank you very much.
I was trying to say previously that Barbara and me will come to that dinner.
Good.
Okay.
Excellent. Thanks, Norman.
I wanted to do.
That's good. Noted.
Having difficulty with the mute.
Yes. Okay, we've got you. Thank you. We've noted that. Thank you, Norman.
Harry, go in front of the camera.
Harry, come here.
Thank you very much. Just want to have a quick word.
Yes.
I understand that our member Vazi Daniels has lost her husband. They were, I think, separated for some time, but he, I think Ray was it? Ralph was a member for some years. Yes. So we're extend our deepest sympathies and condolences. And that's all for today. Thank you.
Thank you. And then I also saw a notice that Stanley Tolman, who is the founder of the company that runs this hotel, also passed away end of last week. And we're making arrangements to send our condolences to his family via the hotel. I think that's all we have. Yes. Toast, well, very important. Toast to the Queen. Will you please be upstanding in the room? Get some water. The toast is the Queen.
The Queen. The
Queen. And before we go on to our speaker, I'm able to tell you that the collection in the room today, which is in favour of the Beirut Milk charity, which the International Dinner is supporting, was in the sum of £119. So thank you all very much for that.
We do have an induction today, Ian.
Oh, do we?
Anastasia.
Oh, okay. Is she here?
Yes, she's on the screen.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Can we do...
Anastasia, would you like to unmute yourself, please, and bring yourself to the top of the screen?
Hi. Thank you.
That's good to see you. President-elect Ian, I am delighted to introduce Anastasia, who is will be our newest member. Anastasia is originally from Italy. She is there at the moment for family reasons, but she lives in London, and she's quite a remarkable, in my view, quite a remarkable young entrepreneur. Let me just tell you a little bit about that, Anastasia. She's the founder of RGA Limited UK, and it's a consultancy firm focused on the initiation, facilitation, and completion of transactions with a big focus in the health and tech sector. They seek to acquire equity stakes in companies with growth prospects, usually in the form of pre-IPO funding, with a view to assisting them with their continued development managerially and strategically, and ultimately securing a realization of their investment through a flotation and sale. That's one company. That's just a little bit of it, I'll tell you. She is also the CEO of the company You Not Us, an advertising company, which she has also founded, and she has clients in many large companies and is extremely successful in that area. Anastasia has a number of interests. Apart from her business acquisitions, she's interested in polo and horse racing, watches, philanthropy, reading, vintage products, cancer research and treatment, meditation, and traveling. President-elect Ian, I'm delighted to introduce Anastasia and to present her to you for induction as a member of the Rotary Club of London.
Thank you, Vice President Clive. Anastasia, that sounds amazing, your CV, and we're obviously very privileged to have you as a member, and we're delighted to welcome you. I'm welcoming you on behalf of the President, who you can see on the screen, but is not able to be here today. And as you know, and probably our visitors may not know, that Rotary was founded in 1905 by Paul Harris in Chicago, and it spread, it was such a good idea and spread so widely that by 1912, this club, the London Club, was the first to be chartered outside North America. And we normally have a certificate on show from Paul Harris chartering us, but it's not with us today. And is it, oh, there we go. So I don't know if we can, you may be able to see that. And it's signed by Paul Harris. And somebody you'll hear about a lot more in due course. And we were the first club to be formed outside North America, and as such, we then have started many clubs, and this is the whole family tree. Which again, when you're able to come to the club and visit us in person, you'll be able to see that. So we look forward to seeing you. And there are, as you may know, there's 1.2 million members spread over 35,000 clubs worldwide, and you're entitled now to go to any of those clubs. But I can say at this particular moment in time, you're not only the newest member of the Rotary Club of London, you're the newest member of Rotary International in the world. So we're delighted to see you. We're delighted at your CV, which I hope you'll bring some of that experience to our club as well, and be involved in service. The motto of the club is service above self. And we hope that you'll contribute towards that. I'm sure you will do. And we very much look forward to seeing you. And I don't know if you want to say a few words yourself.
Thank you. There are several life-changing milestones, and to me, this is one of them. I'm really pleased to join the club today, and I'm really looking forward to be of contribution to you, to our community, and to our society. And I'm really looking forward to meet you all in person and be of service. Thank you.
Good. We look forward to that as well.
Welcome. Thank you, Anastasia.
Which then takes us on to our speaker. Jonathan John T. Paris is the fifth generation of his family to serve in the Royal Navy, and all three of his children have gone to sea in various organisations, including the Navy. He joined in 1974 with the intention of becoming a submariner and did so in 1978. He has served in many nuclear and conventional submarines and has been to sea in those of the US, Dutch and French navies. He saw action in the Falklands conflict in 1982 as a navigating officer of HMS Conqueror. Passed the demanding submarine command course in 1986, and thereafter commanded HMS Unseen, Resolution and Victorious. On coming on shore, he was a staff officer, submarines in the British Embassy in the USA, then in the MOD before becoming the Navy's submarine rescue expert. On leaving the service in 2008, he carried on the rescue role, building and commissioning the new joint UK, France, French and Norwegian system, working for Rolls-Royce. He's now an independent maritime consultant trying to persuade the UK government to build British. But in the meantime, as we're coming up to the 40th anniversary, almost the 40th anniversary of the Falklands, and as the Navy will be and the country will be celebrating Trafalgar Day very short, we thought it very appropriate that he should speak on that subject.
Thank you very much, Ian. Right, I can see myself. Thank you.
Kai, you need to give me the host to share the screen. Kai.
Did you say you wanted to share the screen?
Yes.
Okay, I'll fix that. There we go. Should be okay now.
Perfect.
Good.
Glad you're doing that. Yeah. I'll be a bit sweary by now.
There we are. It's up.
Yep.
It's on screen.
Start the show.
Yep. Perfect.
Where is it? There we go.
I don't know what's happened now. It's gone strange.
Okay. Well, this initial slide really is just by way of an introduction. What I'm going to talk about. Normally, this talk takes about 50 to 60 minutes. I've constrained it somewhat, but I shall at least briefly mention myself. When I was a 25-year-old chap on his second job in submarines, being given charge of a nuclear submarine, which is a rather daunting thing to do. I shall then talk about the two ships, the Belgrano and the Conqueror, talk about the heading south, the massive distance we had to cover, first contact with the enemy, and of course, the attack and the weapons we used. And rather more importantly, the outcomes of the events that I was witness to. And of course, questions and answers at the end. But let's talk about the mood of the Royal Navy as by way of a background. I mean, the crass incompetence of the Heath, Wilson and Callaghan governments of the 70s, compounded by the oil crisis and aggressive unions, meant that the economy was out of control, and inflation indeed had reached 22% in 1980. The value of the pound against the dollar was lower than it had been ever since.
Can I just make a point? We can't see the whole of your slide.
Well, I failed to see. Okay. I don't know what to do.
Candy.
Get a young person to.
It was all right, but it's slipped. Candy, perhaps Candy can come. That's better. It's better. It's back.
Can you see now?
Yeah, it's okay. Now it's gone again.
Perfect.
That's gone again.
He wanted it the way you had it previously, where you only see.
Yeah, only see.
Can you see now?
No.
No?
No.
Go back to the original.
It was original. It was there. It's fine.
Just go back one stage.
It's when you go to slideshow that it goes.
Can you see now?
No.
The dots, not the points.
Yeah.
Now we can see it.
Stay with this. Stay with this.
Leave it there. Don't.
Okay, let's leave it
Okay.
there. Right, the value of the pound against the dollar was lower than it had ever been since. The stock market had been as low as 147 points, and the Thatcher revolution had yet to get going. Surface pay rises lagged behind those of unionized labor. Hence, morale in the services was fragile. Despite the immediacy of the Soviet threat, the services were not highly considered by politicians. The number of parliamentarians with wartime experience was on the ebb, although there were still 2 military crosses in the Thatcher cabinet. The post-World War II retreat from empire and the severe cuts of 1964, 1975, capped by the terrible Knot Review of 1981, which was driven by the parlous state of the nation's finances, drove service people away, principally to Canada and Australia. Fortunately, and despite the fragility of morale, the Royal Navy was ready for the challenge when it came. How different it could have been 6 months later if Knott's plan had been enacted, leaving us with no aircraft carriers and no amphibious shipping. Okay, how now do I change screen to show the next?
Push the down arrow.
Yeah, you just put it down. Yeah.
Yes, that's come up all right.
Move the okay.
No, it's gone back. That's all right now. Yeah,
Right.
leave it there.
Now, on March the 19th of 1982, the Argentine scrap metal activities on South Georgia breached the diplomatic process and made the news by the uninvited landing that month and included film of the raising of the Argentine flag by naval personnel. This was a crisis. Now, the first Sea Lord's personal intervention with the Prime Minister scuppered the Foreign Office and MOD, Ministry of Defence's view that nothing could be done. So a naval task group was cobbled together for what would be the longest ever distance deployed from base to enemy. And that is still true. Now, let's talk about the Belgrano. This picture here is actually taken on the 7th of December, 1941, and shows the USS Phoenix, which was sold to the Argentinians as the Belgrano, on her way out with the burning wrecks of the battleships in the background. Now, Brooke, she was a light cruiser. Now, you might think that a 13,600-ton ship isn't particularly light. Well, cruisers became light if their main guns were 6 inches or less and heavy up to about 8 inches. And the Belgrano was more or less identical in capability and role as the museum ship HMS Belfast. Well worth a visit, by the way. But the key point I want to stress about this slide is the armour. 5 inches armour on the belt, 2 inches armour on the deck. And it was covered the vulnerable parts of the ship. By 1982, very few ships were armoured beyond simple splinter plating. Most anti-ship weapons were missiles rather than shells, relatively feeble against armour. The standard Royal Naval gun, a 4.5-inch gun, had only semi-armour piercing ammunition and would have been outranged by at least 6,000 yards or 3 miles. No Royal Navy ship carried ship-sinking torpedoes. Our aircraft carried bombs, but they were mud-moving bombs, not armour-piercing bombs. So the Belgrano, this old and out-of-date cruiser, would become a huge problem in a gunfight. She had 15 6-inch guns in 5 turrets, and in a 5-minute firefight, one of our unarmoured ships could expect 450 incoming shells, equivalent to about 20 tons of steel and high explosive. And the message of all of this is simple. Only a submarine-launched torpedo was capable of immediately neutralizing the threat that such a vessel would pose. Right, what about Conqueror then? Well, she was launched in Camel Laird's in Birkenhead in 1969 and was delayed because of sabotage to the gearbox by some of the chaps building her. The knock-on effect meant that by 1982, she was unique, unmodified, had little by way of acoustic tiling, no computerized fire control system. Clean-bottomed and new, she was good for about 27 knots. But age and the towed array, which is about a mile long, robbed her of at least 1 knot, probably closer to 2 knots. And we were the 3rd submarine to be called up. And we got that call on Thursday, the 1st of April. And then followed an insane 4 days. And we had only just got back from the United States. And indeed, we had changed our captain only a few days before. And we had to store for war. Trainees were landed, food was embarked. We double-decked. That means that lots of tins of, very large tins of food were spread throughout the main corridor in the submarine. It meant you could not stand upright. You had to walk everywhere bent double. I busied myself planning an 8,000-mile passage, absorbed a whole new catalogue of threat platforms, French, British, United States, and indeed local. Remember that until then, we had been training solely for fighting the Soviets. We had a problem of recalling the leave party. Half of the ship's company were away on leave. And the coxswain, the ship's policeman really, came to see me one morning to report that the team of 20 or so of our sailors in Portsmouth did not believe him. It was, after all, the 1st of April. So what did we do? Well, I instructed him to ring the police and have them arrested. I've never seen a coxswain quite so pleased as he skipped away to arrest 20 of his shipmates. But they did arrive rather sheepishly the next day once they'd actually picked up a paper and decided to read it. We also embarked at the dead of night, some 9 SBS people. It was extremely hush-hush that they were on the boat. Sorry, submarines are boats. and I will use that term again and again, just because I can. They were confined and kept out of sight, but at around midnight, they were permitted to go for a run inside the naval base in Scotland. And at the last minute, we had 3 more join who had driven up from Poole in a 36-seat bus packed with canoes, guns, and the like. They arrived at about midday on the 4th and loaded their equipment. And to conceal their identity from any Argentine spy on the other side of the Gairloch or following up the M6, the bus bore a conspicuous sign saying, Royal Marine Skydiving Team. I can't say that it would have fooled me. We sailed that evening and we didn't take any parachutes. Once clear of the Clyde, we carried out a short dive, the new captain's first. Remember too that we had no real opportunity to train with this captain. We proved that the stowage of the ship was okay by essentially making the boat take very large angles, bow down and bow up, conducted a simple set of basic firing drills, and then surfaced. Our route took us on the surface down the Irish Sea. Once clear of Land's End, we dived in daylight with the aircraft carrier Hermes in sight, embarking aircraft, something I had never seen before. The black lines here aren't exactly our route, but they just indicate where shipping was being moved. And remember, we did all of this in about 6 days, or the whole plan was created in about 6 days, and we started moving ships to Ascension. We cracked on in the full power state, i.e. at maximum speed, and that's about 500 miles a day. Each day we spent an hour at periscope depth, slow, taking in our broadcast, i.e. all the signals we've been receiving. Usually conducted some attack drills while we were there, getting to know how the captain wanted his submarine to be fought. But communications, from time to time we did other things, including going active. That means transmitting on sonar. Not something submarines do very much. However, we were anticipating that we'd be tackling Argentine diesel submarines, and there may well be ice in the Antarctic winter, which again is useful. It is useful then to have active sonar. And when fast, we made a lot of noise, but of course we assumed that nobody was nearby until we got a long way south. Communications became difficult as we approached the equator, which was completely unanticipated. The satellite we used was nearly overhead at the equator. And our antenna, however, was designed for the far north, orientated for the same satellite, but at a very different low elevation. South of the equator, the satellite cover was restored. And then we found that the very low frequency basic signal procedure was getting close to its limits of coverage. However, as long as we had satellite communications, we were okay. But what was the mood of the crew during this helter-skelter southern journey? Simply put, few of us thought that we would go all the way. Years of watching very smart soldiers hauling down the Union flag as a new country was born had inured us to such events. Pretty much no one thought that we would end up in a shooting war. Confidence in the political classes, and especially the Foreign Office, was very low. However, everything changed on arrival at South Georgia on the 19th of April. We were routed not to the Falklands, but to the island of South Georgia, which is about 1,000 miles further east and a little bit further south than the Falklands. We were there to join a small surface task group for Operation Parakeet to recover the island. And we were allocated a station up threat as an anti-shipping patrol. At some point of South Georgia, we hit something and suddenly had no more satellite communications. The aerial on top of the wireless mast was chewed up. We were reduced to the dodgy, very low frequency signal. We started to have to reform whole sheets of paper as the teleprinter produced gobbledygook, but with little bits of cogent English within it. And we were literally cutting and pasting these papers. We ended up with huge lines of mixed gobbledygook and proper text. And we were able to reconstruct the signals, but it was a worrying time because any key part of the signal missing we might well miss something of vital significance. However, unbeknownst to us, the tiny stub of UHF cable sticking out of the wireless mast worked well enough for the satellite 18,000 miles above us. So our repeated attempts at satellite communications transmission were getting through, but our reception side was hopeless. Eventually, we did find one of the signals, which included a plea to send signals only once. That was a relief. More significantly, the mood changed over the next few days because Operation Parakeet was indeed the shooting war that we didn't expect. While up threat, guarding the seaways for the Surface Navy, on the 22nd of April, we made a detection. We had a classic submarine signature on broadband. That's the hull-mounted sonar, the one that gives you accurate bearings and the one where you can actually listen to what it is you've detected. 2 pens high was the cry, instantly galvanized the control room. Conspicuous bearing movement, audible diesel noise. This was electrifying. The watch was stood to. The captain and the XO called. Our immediate thought was this was a submarine. It was close and probably snorting, assuming a low speed, because when you're snorting, you can't go quickly. Its range had to be no more than 6,000 yards, 3 miles away. We came shallow, expecting to be able to see masts, but nothing was in sight, and the contact had faded. We came shallower, with the fin right out of the water, the height of eye, probably 40 feet, still nothing seen. We went deep. We sprinted beyond the maximum range, turned around, transmitted on sonar. Nothing. We tiptoed away, not really sure if we had seen anything. But I have to say that some years later, in 2003, when I was running a submarine rescue planning meeting in San Diego, it was, of course, essential that we did that in California, I was introduced to the Argentine representative who had been the navigating officer of that submarine. I now know that she had been surfaced throughout and doing 22 knots in a race to deliver men and supplies. And that means that she was beyond our ability to see her. The faster she's going, clearly the further away she was. And the detection may well have been a convergence zone, a fluke detection distorted by reflections within the sea. They had managed to arrive into Grytviken in South Georgia and unload their men and supplies. And if you look at this, that is South Georgia. It's about 100 miles long, and the brown line is where the Argentine submarine, the Santa Fe, went. And she came all the way into Grytviken. There's very few people on board or in South Georgia. In Grytviken is now the British Antarctic Survey headquarters. But other than that, there is nobody there. Although for the Falklands War on Bird Island, right at the tip, there were 2 British ornithologists counting penguins or something, both female. They were rather surprised when unexpectedly a Royal Navy helicopter turned up and gave them sufficient food for them to stay there for at least 3 months, and also a pistol each, just in case the Argies were beastly to them. But there we go. But the Santa Fe tried to run north, and on her way out was detected several times. And the captain decided to stay on the surface, which you might think was a gutsy thing to do. But through the periscope, all he could see was 2 cylinders suspended beneath the aircraft that was attacking him. He thought they were torpedoes, and if he dived, the torpedoes could catch him. If he stayed on the surface, they were very unlikely to be able to catch him because his keel was too high in the water. But actually, they were depth charges, and they landed either side of his submarine, right astern, blew up shallow, and drove in the shaft seals. So suddenly, he was in a sinking submarine, as they could not pump enough water out to keep the submarine on the surface. So they turned around, went back into Grytviken, beached the submarine, and abandoned it. And the Surface Task Group then collected the 80-odd Royal Marines they could muster and took back the islands with overwhelming fire from 2 of the surface ships, with the Argentine soldiers there going to surrender stations pretty quickly. Now, after the recovery of South Georgia, we hung around for a while, still attempting to clear the satellite communications problem. We landed our SBS chaps. Incidentally, 2 of our crew plus several Bren guns were washed overboard by a rogue wave, and the water temperature was only about 2 degrees C. But importantly, the antenna problem was solved. The Royal Navy was able to set up a high-frequency link to New Zealand. I might think, well, New Zealand is a long way away. But actually, remember, the Earth is round, and the further south you go, the closer things get. And actually, provided the terminator, I say the light and darkness, was not between us, we had good communications, which was truly a great relief. But one of the reasons I'm banging on about this as opposed to the Belgrano incident was that this was the same time that we saw the first symptoms of stress among the crew. Again, something we did not expect. Now, I was aware of 3 cases. An older member, he was what we call a panel watchkeeper, in charge of sort of pumping and flooding and what have you, in the control room where I, as the navigator, worked. And he was really quite shaken. The incident happened that a young stoker and I were discussing how we were going to do some particular piece of pumping and flooding. And the chief stood up, seized this young sailor by the lapels of his shirt, picked him up, nose to nose. "Listen to the officer, we could all be killed," expletive deleted. What on earth do you say when somebody who you really have come to rely on all your time on board the submarine would behave in such an extreme manner? Well, we just patted him on the shoulder. "Well, thanks very much, Chief. Good point, well made. Find him something to do." But what I'd like you to do is just check that the contents of this tank is right and that we've got this ready and this is being done. We also, later on, because he was so nervous, had to give him permission to smoke at all times, even at black lighting when we were looking through the periscope. And we could not land him, so we had to live with him. There was also a young stoker, 17 or 18, whose action station was the motor room, which is the aftermost compartment of the submarine. Very shallow, very narrow, conical. He would be locked in there, and he would, of course, hear the planes and the propeller making huge amounts of noise, not knowing what was going on. And he started to get a bit wobbly. But what the engineers did was that they put an older man in with him. And the older guy, actually, was one of those sort of sensible people, again, who you do rely on. He took with him all the necessary books and instructions to help this young chap qualify for the next rank. And in other words, he was giving him something urgent to do. And that worked. And it worked elsewhere as well. We also had a panic attack in the control room. But actually, at a later stage, we were overflown by an aircraft and we thought a torpedo had been dropped. And this chap leapt to his feet in the control room, shrieked at the top of his voice, said, "My mum says I should never have joined submarines. I should have been a policeman." As you can imagine, there was instantly a rather Anglo-Saxon expression, and he was put right back into his chair and he got on with stuff. The funny thing was, the last time I met that guy was actually in Paisley, and he was a detective inspector. So he did eventually join the police. But it's worth saying that we took this issue seriously. We changed how we conducted looking after the people. The rounds routine. We made sure the second officer of the watch, at the end of every 6-hour watch, walked through the whole submarine and talked to people, especially the night chef, because the night chef was the guy who made all the bread and made breakfast. Everybody would speak to him. And this is a good way of getting a message to everybody without having to make long and tedious broadcasts over the tannoy system. We put up charts showing people where we were. We laid a reassuring hand on a shoulder. We became more watchful and considerate. In retrospect, these were things that we should have been doing all along, but we had become used to working at very high levels of classification in our normal patrols. So we had lost sight of what was really normality. Also, of course, in those patrols, people weren't trying to sink us. And contact with the enemy sharpened us up. Despite the uncertainty of Santa Fe's detection, we had found ourselves with bow caps open, ready to shoot at a real submarine full of real people. And if he had heard us, he was quite likely to have a crack at us too. We got much better in all aspects of what we were trying to achieve. We became even more of a team than submariners are, as a matter of course. What then about an appreciation of the situation on April the 30th? Now, we had departed South Georgia on the 28th and started a transit going to the south and west, passing north of the Birdwood Bank, which you can see is the sort of white blob about halfway up from the middle. And we were allocated water to operate in further to the west, where we believed that the Belgrano group was based. And interestingly, the charting down there in 40 years ago was pretty primitive. One of the charts we had as we were crossing the 1,000 miles from South Georgia to our new patrol area had the encouraging message, surveyed by Lieutenant James Cook, Royal Navy, 1774. I often wonder if anyone was making that chart, dear old James was considering the issues of a 4,500 ton nuclear submarine at 20-ish knots and down at 600 feet. And in these areas where everything was uncertain, we would operate the echo sounder, not something that you normally do. And we rehearsed coming shallow and reversing course in a hurry in case of pinnacles. And more significantly, we found a couple too. And that saved the day. These are uncharted pillars of rock coming up from the bottom, typically former volcanoes. Now, the tactical situation was, as you can see it here. The little black submarine in the middle is a guess as to where the San Luis, the only functional Argentine submarine, and she claimed a couple of attacks, but no hits. It's now evidenced that an error by one of the torpedo maintainers on board wrecked the gyros of their German-built torpedoes. But you can see there's an apparent pincer movement. There's the 25th of May, Viento Cinco de Mayo, the ex-British aircraft carrier, which the Argentines had bought some years before, and there was the Belgrano group to the south, and one or two other groups as well. And the British task force was to the north and east of East Falkland. HMS Splendid, another nuclear submarine, was up to the northwest, chasing the carrier, and her British-built escorts were with her. Spartan, the other submarine that was there at the time, was kept close to the task group, mustering to the northeast and acting as the anti-submarine warfare guard. And of course, at least 3 other submarines were on their way. Now, our intelligence was quite good, and it put the Belgrano group to the south of the Birdwood Bank, and the captain's plan was essentially to go round the Birdwood Bank and come through the gap between land and the bank. He, having correctly surmised that they wouldn't attempt to cross the bank because that would take them into the total exclusion zone that we had declared and immediate attack thereby. But during the afternoon of April the 30th, we made a detection. That evening, we first detected a classic slow diesel signature on the towed array. Now, the towed array is a cylindrical sensor. It's about 600 feet long, but actually if you add the tow cable, it's about a mile long, and that trails along behind the submarine. So it's in a place where any of the noise of your own submarine does not interfere with detections. And this signature was essentially resolved down to the west, clearly a large merchant vessel where one would not expect to be seen. It also tied in with the rough intelligence estimate of the Belgrano group location. As we closed, we also detected briefly a faint bearing whine. Now, a bearing whine means a geared system. It has to be a steam-powered system. There are no merchant ships, or there were very few merchant ships with geared systems, almost certainly a warship. And that was the sonar clue, the first one we had, that vessels were here other than a tanker with direct drive and large 2-stroke diesel, almost certainly warships. Overnight, we continued to make ground towards what we hoped to find was the Belgrano group. We took the broadcast when we could and had a sniff of a 4-bladed screw at 124 RPM. Probably doesn't mean very much to us, but a 4-bladed screw, it's a classic American destroyer indicator. And the destroyers that the Argentine Navy had, except the 2 British ones, were American. We continued to press on, sprinting and drifting, going fast, then slowing down for a bit to listen. And at sunrise, we came shallow again, nothing seen. So we went deep and sprinted for an hour at 15 knots. And on slowing, on broadband, that's the bow sonar, we had several ships. We immediately came shallow. And again, the tension in the control room was absolutely palpable. The captain was very quietly spoken, so if he was saying something, everybody shut up. The previous captain was a bit shouty, so we would sometimes shout back. But the periscope goes up, and he does what's called an all-round look. It takes about 30 seconds. Complete rotation around the horizon, puts the handles up, periscope goes down. And he announced, warship in sight at 10,000 yards, about 5 miles away. On his next look, about 5 minutes later, he reported there were 5 ships, all to the west of us, heading south. Now, I've always been a bit of a ship spotter, so the captain gave me the periscope for the next look and told me to identify the ships, which were, as you said, about 10,000 yards, although in my mind's eye, they were much closer. Anyway, I did it, and it was very straightforward. That's the tanker, the Rosario. Press the cut button, and the bearing appears on our records. To the right of her slightly was the Belgrano refueling, and then there were 2 more ships, American destroyers, indistinguishable from each other. No 5th ship, no masts or anything. And I put the periscope down. But what I was also able to report to the captain was that there were no radar aerials rotating. These guys were not transmitting. We also clearly, because we could hear no sonar transmissions, they too were silent. So we opened range, came up to periscope depth again, transmitted a signal, and then returned to shadow the group. Having refueled, the task group and the Belgrano started to move to the southeast, south of the Birdwood Bank that I pointed out before. Now, at the time, we didn't really understand their posture. But in 2015, I met with the gunnery officer of the Belgrano over a decent dinner in the Army and Navy Club. And he related that they were deliberately passive and propelling on single screws, showing no lights and no transmissions, trying to look not like a warhead, not like a warship. And this was not an unsuccessful ploy. There were several occasions over the next 2 days when we found tracking them awkward and we missed changes in course and had to speed up and keep up. And the next day, however, they changed their posture, altering the speed of course. And at one point during the night, we did detect radar transmissions. No idea why. It might have been an aircraft. One thing I should stress about this ship, though, was the affection with which it was regarded within the Argentine Navy. Just about everybody in their Navy did their first training cruise on her, and to be captain was considered a great honor. And General Belgrano himself was a national hero of the struggle for independence, a sort of George Washington for Argentina. But by the morning of the 2nd of May, the task group had turned back to the west. And if they kept outside of the total exclusion zone, we would need a rule of engagement change in order to attack. The rules of engagement are a simple grid. It starts off with 3. Are we going to increase tension, maintain the status quo, or try and calm things down? And then there's about 15 sort of sets of what you're allowed to attack in what circumstances. And it's a very simple process and it works very well. We had to discuss what torpedo to use. We carried 2 types of torpedo, the Mark 8 and the Mark 24. Now the Mark 8 had been in Royal Naval service since at least 1932. So it was 50 years old. It was robust, reliable, one of the very few World War II torpedoes that worked perfectly from day one to day last. It also had a massive warhead. And I mean, the ones we had actually were relatively new, manufactured in 1943. But the Mark 24 was not so sound. This was an electric wire-guided torpedo, full of problems. Our yearly firings concealed some shortcomings, as we were never able to operate the weapon beyond to where the wire broke. And this was a major problem. The simulations that we had always presented a successful attack, but we really didn't believe them. So, up against a World War II ship, we used a World War II torpedo. And there it is. You can see a large air cylinder in the middle, massive warhead, over 800 pounds. The pistol is simply the simple device to initiate the warhead when it bangs into the target. And it had its own rudders, and it had its own air-powered compass in order to direct it in the right direction. This is the Mark 24, very much Cold War weapon, relatively small warhead, very stealthy, but very unreliable. So the attack itself, now slightly crude, but to the right you can see the fact that there's a little sort of representative of a ship plus two smaller ships. That just shows the formation in which the Argentines were in as they were heading to the east. Clearly, up threat to them was the Red Arrow, i.e. any fire from British ships, and the two destroyers were always kept up threat. Very sensible. Now, we've been in contact for nearly 2 days at this stage, and we didn't get the change in the rules of engagement until that afternoon, exactly 48 hours, funny enough, after the initial detection. The Belgrano group had then reversed course early on the 2nd of May, possibly around sunrise. But this was not the attack we were expecting. We had anticipated, those arrows to the right of the picture, a turn to the north and a run towards the task group, either straight through the total exclusion zone or hugging the boundary. It's worth pointing out the attack itself was not particularly demanding. We had successfully worked ourselves up during the transit south. The experiences of South Georgia had reminded us to be sharp. The target was large and slow. We had 3 tubes loaded with Mark 8s and 3 with Mark 24s, just in case we were able to get close. Conditions were not particularly good, however. And the destroyers being up threat, they did get in the way during the initial approach, so the captain just took the boat deep, got to the other beam where we had a free hand. And this was, in every sense of the word, a deliberate attack. And the CO's plan was for a perfect firing position, approximately on the beam, about 1,500 to 1,800 yards from the ship, and what's called a zero GA shot. So the torpedoes are on the same course as the submarine. The attack developed. Regular periscope setups on the various systems were established, the course and speed of the target. There were no further maneuvers to the target. The 2 destroyers were out of it. The captain called for his final setup. And as the periscope went down, the XO piped up, "Do not fire." Now, that's quite an unusual thing to hear during an attack on a ship, which is so close, less than a mile from you. But what he actually said was, "Do not fire, gyro angle improving." In other words, the captain was going too soon. And the first lieutenant could see the electromechanical target tracker moving the target into the right place. He was able to say, "Now, sir." Up went the periscope. Bearing that, cut, on, shouted. In other words, all the various rotating dials did not jerk. The solution was good. Fire. And the weapon went out at 2 right, 0, and 3 left. A perfect salvo at a 3-second interval. They could clearly be heard running on the underwater telephone, which is a small sonar which you can use like a radio. The CO raised the periscope to observe. We were rather closer than planned, probably at around 1,100 yards. And we'd done a Sync-X firing about 5 or 6 months earlier, so we knew what the explosions were like. They're not bangs. It's much more of a thump. And the first thump was met by loud cheers. Instantly, my job as the officer watch was to tell everybody to shut up, face their panel, do as they were required. And the next thump, silence in the control room, but we could hear cheers coming up from below. The third thump rekindled the voices in the control room. 3 hits, wow, we weren't expecting that. But the 4th thump confused us for a while. And of course, what we were listening to was the direct path coming to us from the Belgrano and also being reflected off the bottom. And it just so happened that the cadence was exactly the same as the firing cadence. So we only had 2 hits. We just heard each hit twice.
We're coming towards the end.
Yes.
Everybody's wrapped here, so we're quite happy to continue, but we're
Okay,
a bit
well,
past our...
Well, here is the view of the Beguine, which shows the hits. There's 2 little arrows. The first hit was in the engine room, which stopped the turbo generators, plunged the ship into darkness, and created a large fireball in the dining hall immediately above. Most of the casualties were from that compartment. The other arrow shows the other hit, which removed the bow. And the third torpedo actually struck one of the destroyers, but right at the end of its run, so it didn't see sufficient speed change to actually go off. We headed away, and when we came up, we found the 2 destroyers heading towards us. So we went deep, and we went fast, and we went faster, and for longer. But the gunnery officer, remember, whom I dined, asked me about our choice of impact and time, he being under the impression that we deliberately set out to strike the dining hall as the oncoming watch were being briefed there. More interestingly to me, is at the time of the hit, he was asleep in a cabin in the superstructure and was sleeping naked, which I find astonishing. In the British Navy, in war, probably don't even take your shoes off. But he ended up half-dressed and in a life raft. And actually, you can just see underneath the forward turret, there is a tiny little red blob, and there's the Belgrano sinking. And his life raft was one that hit the torn metal at the end and was in a sinking condition. So he and his 11 companions, largely unproperly dressed, had to enter water, which is 2 degrees C, and swim to an adjacent one. The fact that they survived is pretty remarkable. But the immediate effect, well, the Argentine Navy went home. And there is some evidence that the submarine stayed. We had established local sea control. The only reinforcement route was in the air, and it very much reduced the threat to our surface ships. In the long term, this restored the reputation of UK arms. The relationship with the United States was very much enhanced, as I found later when I worked there. Soviet attitudes to us had to change. They had just described us as being hopelessly effete and decadent. Actually, we were extremely efficient. The Navy was justified and saved from the emasculation of the Not Review, and the Argentine junta fell. And for me, I got to go home, meet my wife and daughter. I might point out I had met my wife before. And my daughter, she did actually join the Navy, albeit only for two years. And she's now a mum of 3 in Australia, which ends what I have to say. Are there any questions? I would be happy to take.
We're running a bit over time, but we'll take.
I'm sorry.
I'll be pretty brief.
Can we put it onto the main screen again, or can do?
Yeah. Can we take the screen sharing down, please?
Stop sharing.
Okay, I'll carry on regardless. I'm very fortunate to have read the book about the Harriers and the Falklands.
Yes.
I can't remember the exact title, maybe more than one.
There are.
But it was excellent. It was no picnic. There were lots of problems with the Air Force getting it right as well. The cargo ship which went down, which was the converted container ship.
Yes.
I can't remember for a moment.
Atlantic Conveyor.
Yeah, the whole thing. Amazing reading, and what a story, but frightening and much more difficult than perhaps we at home watching the news would have ever imagined.
Well, as I say, there were things that we had not anticipated. Perhaps we should have done. It certainly changed how I approached certain things about when I was actually in command of submarines. Any other questions?
I don't know, Clive, if you've got any questions, whether we should be drawing it to a close. That's because we're going beyond our time, but we've got a wrapped audience here and everybody's enjoying it. But I think, Jonty, I think we're going to have you back another time.
Well, yeah, as you've just learned.
I don't know, certainly from the screen and certainly from here, everybody's wrapped and paying attention to every word you said. It really was fascinating. The background to it, what happened. I mean, none of us here would have ever experienced what you went through and what the crew went through. And I'm sure a lot of the crew weren't expecting to be in an actual